Hey there, tonight we're not heading to a battlefield. We're not climbing castle walls or whispering through haunted monasteries. Tonight, we're walking through the long, narrow life of a medieval peasant. The kind of life that didn't allow for softness. The kind of life that kept you moving. That carved muscle into your back and stole fat from your bones. Because no one was trying to lose weight back then. They didn't need to. Hunger did that for them. So did the land, the cold, the endless, bone-deep work that stretched from before sunrise to long after dark. No dumbbells, no treadmills, no macros, just survival. So if you've ever wondered what the ultimate no-gym workout looked like, or why no one in your average medieval village had a spare belly or a soft face, this is the quiet history you didn't know you were waiting for. And if this kind of calm, slow immersion helps you relax, helps you sleep, feel free to like the video and subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and whether you're lying down, walking, or just letting the night move around you. Now, settle in, pull the blankets up, and let's walk back into a world where rest was rare, food was harder won, and no one ever skipped leg day. Let's begin. The morning stretch wasn't optional. You didn't wake up slowly in a medieval village. There were no alarms, just instinct, cold, and the sound of animals already impatient outside. The body ached before the eyes opened, muscles tight from sleeping on straw, joints stiff from the damp that crept in overnight. There were no mattresses, just layers of hay, cloth, maybe a rough wool blanket if you were lucky. And you rose fast, because if you didn't start moving early, you fell behind, and no one waited. First came the fire, always. It had to be rekindled before the chill settled in your bones for the day. You squatted low, bent over the hearth, blowing on coals, striking flint, coaxing warmth from last night's ashes. That squat, you'd hold it longer than any gym pose. Then the water. If you lived near a well, it was still a walk. If not, you were hauling buckets from the stream, uphill, across frozen mud or spring slicks. Each pail could weigh 30-40 pounds when full. You didn't carry one, you carried two, balanced by a yoke or sloshing in each hand, muscles straining before the sun had even breached the sky. Breakfast wasn't ready and waiting, you made it, while still moving. Grinding grain meant turning a heavy stone wheel again and again with your arms and back and hips. Kneading bread meant 10 minutes of pressing your weight forward, folding, pounding. If there was a milk, it came from a goat or cow you milked yourself. After corralling it, feeding it, maybe chasing it across a muddy field first. By the time food passed your lips, you'd already burned more calories than many do all day. And it wasn't over. You ate standing, moving, tending the fire or dressing a child or pulling on boots with frayed laces. You didn't linger. You didn't sip. There was too much to do, and too few hours to do it in. The fool once said, "Peasants don't wake up, they resume moving." And he was right, because your body didn't get a warm-up. Your life was the warm-up, and it stretched on until dusk. The endless cardio of chasing chickens and children. It started right after breakfast, if there was one, before the field work, before the hauling. First came the animals, and if you think medieval livestock stood still when called, you've clearly never met a hungry goat, or a chicken with opinions. Most peasant homes had a few animals, a goat, a pig, a handful of hens, maybe a cow if you were doing well. They weren't tucked into tidy pens, they wandered, they got out, they got into things, and you spent half your day chasing them. The pig broke through the fence, that was your sprint workout. The hens scattered into the brush, time for agility drills. The cow needed milking but refused to stand still, that's core strength and patience training combined. And if you had small children, you ran double. Because while one child tried to eat charcoal from the hearth, another wandered toward the ditch. You learned to move fast, to lift quickly, to bend, reach, snatch, haul. all while keeping a running inventory of everyone's location and general safety. You didn't have time to sit. You didn't even notice you were tired, because movement was constant, not intense, just unrelenting. Water needed fetching again. The fire needed feeding. A cloak needed mending, and the baby needed bouncing while you stitched it. Every step counted. Every motion burned something, and none of it was optional. There was no resting heart rate. There was no heartbreak. Just the steady rhythm of motion. Hour after hour, muscle after muscle. The fool once said, "If you sit for too long in this village, someone assumes you've died." And so, you moved. Because things needed tending. Because no one else was going to do it. Because in this world, stillness didn't mean peace. It meant something was being forgotten. Digging, planting, hauling. The ultimate full body workout. Modern fitness routines are split into legs, core, upper body. Medieval peasants didn't have that luxury. They trained everything. Every day. Because once the animals were fed, the fire was steady, and the children were momentarily silent, it was time for the fields. And the fields didn't forgive. Ploughing started early. If you were lucky enough to have an ox, you walked behind it, shoulders hunched, gripping wooden handles that rattled in your palms with every stone. The blades sank into hard-packed earth. Dry in summer, frozen in early spring, and you leaned forward, putting your entire body weight behind it. No ox, then you pulled it yourself, raking, sowing, spreading manure. It was all done by hand, shovel to soil, sack to shoulder, repeat. And then came the weeding, kneeling for hours in the dirt, moving row by row, back bent, fingertips black. You didn't count reps, you didn't time your squats, but your thighs burned all the same. Harvest season? That was another beast entirely. Swinging a scythe took rhythm, precision, and arm strength. Bundling stalks meant lifting, tying, carrying, and all of it happened under sun, wind, or rain. There was no shade tent, no water break schedule, just the land, and how much you could coax from it before your knees gave out. And afterward, you hauled it all home. Barrels, baskets, bales, strapped to backs, balanced on heads, dragged behind in carts. You didn't think about posture. You didn't consider hydration. You just moved. All of it burned through calories like dry straw under a torch. There was no room for softness. Every meal had already been earned, twice over. The fool once said, "You can tell who owns the field by the shape of their spine." Because in this world, labor carved itself into the body, visible, permanent, not for beauty but for survival. Foraging miles on foot, nature's reluctant gym. The fields were hard, but the woods were everywhere. And for the medieval peasant, they weren't a place for quiet walks or poetic reflection. They were the pantry, the pharmacy, the fuel depot. And walking through them was part of your workout, whether you knew it or not. Every season had its task. Spring meant herbs, wild garlic, nettles, dandelions, sorrel. You walked with a woven basket and an eye for green, kneeling, reaching, scanning, your back never straight for long. Summer brought berries, bilberries, elderberries, raspberries, whatever the birds hadn't claimed first. You moved fast, waded through bramble and mud, swatted flies, climbed short hillsides barefoot, balancing a pot in one hand, swatting gnats with the other. Autumn meant mushrooms, if you knew which ones wouldn't kill you. And firewood. So much firewood. You gathered fallen limbs, broke branches across your knee, hauled bundles bound with rope across shoulders already sore from planting and reaping. And in winter, you didn't stop. You foraged twigs, dry moss, bark to burn. Sometimes, if it was bad, you scraped lichen from rocks, pulled frost-bitten roots, or dug beneath snow for anything that might not have died. And you did it all on foot, because carts didn't go into forests, not easily. Paths twisted, terrain was uneven, boots were thin, every step used energy, every trip was a hike, not recreational, not gentle, just necessary. And let's not forget hunting. Most peasants weren't allowed to hunt game, it was illegal. But birds, frogs, snares for rabbits, that was survival. You crouched, you waited, you sprinted, you climbed trees and slipped into bogs. You threw stones and sometimes you missed. But you kept moving, because the forest didn't feed you freely, it demanded motion. The fool said once, "Every meal takes a mile." He wasn't exaggerating. In the medieval workout plan, foraging was the cardio that never quit, and the forest was the gym with no roof, no rules and no days off. Carrying fire, weightlifting in disguise. There was no electricity, no gas. Every bit of heat in a medieval peasant's life came from one place: fire. But fire wasn't just something that sat quietly in a hearth. It had to be made, moved, fed, nursed. And keeping it alive, that was your full body workout for the day, and sometimes the night. Let's start with the fuel. Firewood didn't appear by magic. You gathered it, by hand, in all seasons. Dry twigs, split logs, fat branches, cut with axes that were dull more often than not, lifted overhead, brought down in rhythmic swings that punished your shoulders and blistered your palms. The logs weren't just stacked at your door. You carried them, in bundles, on your back, sometimes in rough-woven sacks or lashed with cord against your chest. Some people used sleds or barrows, but many didn't have them. They used what they had, their own strength. And it didn't stop there. You fed the fire in the morning. You poked at it throughout the day. You crouched over it until your knees went numb and your eyes stung from smoke. And if it went out, you either borrowed coals from a neighbour and walked them back in a clay pot, hoping they didn't die before you got home, or you started it again from scratch. That meant flint, steel, char, skill, and time. Blowing embers into flame was a kind of breath work you never wanted to master but always had to. Your cheeks burned, your fingers froze, your patience thinned. Every single day. And if your house had more than one fire, you did it all again. Fire was for heat, for cooking, for light. Without it, your food didn't soften, your children didn't sleep, your body didn't thaw. And because it never lit itself, never carried itself, never stayed, unless you tended it. Fire was heavy, fire was demanding, fire was a workout. The fool once said, "There's no warmth in this world unless you drag it in yourself." And in the Middle Ages he was right, because every flame was earned, with weight, with ash, with movement. No chairs, no cushions, no slouching allowed. We often think of rest as passive, but in the medieval world, rest had form, because the body never fully stopped, and when it didn't melt into a couch or sink into a cushion. It perched. Peasant homes rarely had chairs, not the kind we imagine. There were benches, stools, low logs set near the fire, sometimes just the dirt, or a pile of straw. No backrests, no armrests, nothing soft. Sitting meant holding your own weight, back straight, knees bent, core subtly engaged whether you liked it or not. And because your clothes were rough, thick or damp, the floor wasn't a place you lingered. Squatting was more common than sitting, and not the kind you see in a gym, controlled, balanced, brief. This was the resting squat, heels flat, knees apart, weight centered over ankles, muscles taut but not tense, held for minutes, sometimes hours, while shelling beans or weaving baskets or simply watching the stew bubble. Children learned it young. Old people did it out of habit. It was a posture of readiness and necessity, because if you dropped something, you didn't bend with your back, you squatted. If you stirred the fire, you didn't kneel, you hovered. And when the work paused, your body didn't slump, it reset. This unintentionally built strength. Legs, ankles, lower back, core, all trained without a single conscious rep. And when sleep finally came, even that wasn't a collapse. You laid down on hard straw, maybe a blanket, maybe not. Your body curled around heat, your own or someone else's. You didn't toss, you locked in. The fool said once, "The only thing soft in this village is the dog." And the dog slept on the floor, because in this life even stillness had structure, even quiet shaped you, and a medieval peasant didn't need Pilates. They had the floor, carrying everything, everywhere, all at once. There were no wagons for the poor, no backpacks with padded straps, no lockers, no shelves. So what did you do when you needed to move something? You carried it by hand, on your back, over your head, with your hips, your arms, your whole body straining into shapes that modern trainers might admire, if not flinch at, because everything needed moving. Buckets of water, bundles of firewood, sacks of grain, tools, baskets of food, children who couldn't keep up, clothes to be washed, goods to be traded, clay to be shaped. You didn't pick one errand, you picked 5, and balanced them. The farmer's carry wasn't a gym move, it was a lifestyle. Hauling 2 full buckets from the well, your shoulders pulled down, your fingers white from gripping the rough handles, your arms trembling before you even hit the halfway mark. The overhead press? Try balancing a pot of barley over your head while weaving through a muddy path, dodging goats, kids and roots. The weighted squat. That was just how you stood up from milking a cow. Nothing had wheels, everything had weight, even clothes, even tools. You wrapped bundles in cloth and looped the knot around your forehead, or slung a yoke across your shoulders, or just bore the strain step by step with feet that had already walked too far. And it wasn't once a day, it was all day, back and forth, field to house, house to stream, stream to field. No shortcuts, no rides, no off switch. It trained your posture, your stamina, your tolerance for pain. And the weight wasn't measured in kilograms, it was measured in need. The fool once said, if it fits in 2 hands, it moves in 1 trip. And that was the rule, because making 2 trips meant more time. And time was another thing you carried, so you adjusted, you endured. You loaded the day onto your spine and walked it where it needed to go. And somehow you didn't break. You just kept moving. While washing clothes was an upper body gauntlet. You didn't toss anything in a washer. There were no spin cycles, no knobs, no soap pods. Doing laundry in the medieval world was an act of endurance. It started with the haul, because clean water wasn't at your doorstep. You walked, carried. Sometimes balanced jugs on your hips or in yokes across your shoulders. And the load wasn't light. A week's worth of clothes, rough wool, soaked linen, held water like a sponge and weighed more than a full-grown child. You bent, you knelt, you soaked. Then came the scrubbing. There were no washing boards, not at first. You used flat stones, your knuckles, a stiff brush if you had one. You slammed wet fabric against rock, again and again and again. The impact jolted up your arms, the water stung your skin. Soap, not the soft bubbly kind. You had lye soap, alkaline, harsh, almost caustic, made from wood ash and animal fat. It burned cuts, dried your hands until the skin cracked, but it worked. And when the dirt didn't come out, you boiled it, over a fire, in a cauldron, stirring heavy cloth through steaming lye water with a long wooden paddle. You didn't lean in too far, you could scald yourself. After that, rinsing, wringing, hauling. You twisted the cloth tight, using every ounce of forearm strength you had, forcing water out through grip and grit. A large sheet could take 2 people to wring. Your shoulders shook, your back protested, your legs locked to stabilize your stance, and it wasn't a one-day job. In many homes, laundry was done once a month, sometimes less. When it happened, it consumed the entire day, maybe two. You dried the clothes on bushes or lines if you had them, sometimes just on the grass. You flipped them as they dried. You kept an eye out for animals, wind, or unexpected rain. Then you carried them all back, clean, heavy, wet around the edges, but clean. The fool said once, "You haven't really lifted until you've wrung out a monk's robe." And he was right, because in the medieval world, laundry wasn't chore day, it was a strength test. And your arms never forgot it. Grinding grain, a core workout. Disguised as breakfast before you could eat bread, you had to earn it, and not just by growing the wheat or carrying the water or building the fire. You had to grind the grain, by hand, with stone, in a way that punished your back, arms, shoulders, and, surprisingly, your core. The quernstone was a staple of peasant kitchens. Two circular slabs of rock, one set atop the other. Grain was poured through a central hole, then crushed between the stones as the top one rotated. You turned it with a wooden handle, over and over and over. You leaned into it with your torso, using your whole body to push the wheel in a circle. The motion wasn't large, but it was constant, repetitive, straining. And the stones weren't light. The lower quern could weigh over 50 kilograms. The upper one, easily 20 or more. Even moving it to clean or adjust the grind took effort. And this wasn't a 5-minute job. Grinding enough grain for a day's bread could take hours, especially if you had a large family, or guests, or a feast day to prepare for. Some villages had communal mills, larger water or animal powered, but these often belonged to lords and came with fees, so most peasants used what they had, their own arms, their own time, their own strength. The motion was low, rotational, torso tight, back straight or screaming. You didn't track your ab work, you lived it, and if you didn't grind, you didn't eat. Even children helped, taking turns as their arms could handle it. Women did most of the work, often while also tending to infants, watching pots and keeping an eye on fires. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't fast, but it was essential. And every morning the same ritual: grain to stone, stone to sweat, sweat to flour, flour to bread. The fool once said, "Bread is made of muscle before it's made of dough." And he was right, because for a peasant, breakfast began with a workout, and every loaf was earned. Building your own house, the original strength program. No contractors, no blueprints, no delivery trucks. If you wanted a home in the Middle Ages, you didn't sign a lease. You built it, with your hands, with your neighbours, with whatever the land was willing to give. And in the process, you pushed your body through one of the most complete physical tests a human can endure. Let's start with the frame. Timber framing meant chopping trees, real ones, not small brush. You felled them with hand axes, stripped the bark, split them and hauled them across fields, sometimes with oxen, often with other villagers, always heavy. Then came the wattle and daub, wattle branches woven into walls like baskets. You stood, twisted, pulled, ducked. It was shoulder work, elbow work, finger strength and tension control. Daub, a blend of clay, straw, animal dung and water, mixed with feet, then applied by hand. You scooped it up in great handfuls and slapped it onto the frame, over and over. It dried slow and cracked often. You had to fill the cracks. You had to be patient. You had to be strong. Then the roof. Thatched, usually, which meant climbing, balancing, and dragging bundles of dried reeds up a ladder you made yourself. You tied them into place with twine and hope, your arms shaking above your head for hours. It was physical. It was dangerous. It was survival. Windows weren't glass. They were oiled parchment or wooden shutters. Doors were rough planks hammered together, heavy and uneven. Floors were dirt, smoothed with a rake, packed with your boots, flattened by daily motion. You didn't move in. You stayed as soon as the walls could keep out the wind. And even then, the work didn't stop. The house shifted, settled, leaked, needed patching, reinforcing, propping. You weren't just building a home. You were maintaining it every day, every season. The fool said once, "The house builds your arms while you build it." And it was true, because the medieval home wasn't a resting place, it was a strength test you lived inside. The medieval diet, built for burn, not bloat. It's one thing to work all day, it's another to do it with almost nothing in your stomach. Because the truth is, you couldn't get fat if you tried. The medieval peasant diet wasn't designed for comfort. It was built around what you could grow, what you could trade, what you could survive on. Let's start with the staples. Bread, porridge, peas, cabbage, onions, turnips, sometimes eggs. A little cheese if your cow or goat hadn't dried up. Maybe, just maybe, a piece of salted fish or dried meat on a feast day. No sugar, no processed oil, no refined flour. You worked harder than any athlete, but with fewer calories than most modern desk workers. Breakfast? If it existed, it was a hunk of bread, maybe soaked in weak ale or a bit of hot water. Sometimes you just started the day with a gulp from the stream and kept moving. Lunch was the big one. But big meant a bowl of stew. Mostly root vegetables, maybe a bit of barley or rye. You ate it with your hands or a bit of crust, and you didn't waste time chewing slowly. Dinner, leftovers, cold mash. Sometimes nothing. Fats were scarce. Sweetness was rare. And overeating, not possible. Not when a bag of flour had to last your family a month. But it wasn't just about what they ate. It was when they ate. Sometimes only twice a day. Sometimes less if the harvest was bad. Fasting wasn't a health trend, it was a religious rule and a seasonal reality. And through it all, your body was moving, walking, lifting, digging, carrying. While fueled on cabbage water and crusts, you didn't count calories, your body did it for you. By burning every spare one just to keep warm, just to haul wood, just to lift a child who'd fallen face first into a mud puddle again. The fool once said, "If you see a fat man in a peasant's tunic, he's either rich or lying." Because in this life, fat wasn't shameful. It was impossible. You burned it all. Every hour. Every day. Winter didn't mean rest. It meant resistance training. You might think winter offered a break. It didn't. When snow fell, when the wind cut through gaps in the walls, when the fields turned to frozen silence, the work didn't stop. It got heavier, because nothing came easy in the cold. Every chore doubled in weight. Buckets froze solid. Axes had to be warmed before they could cut. Your breath hung in the air and your joints fought you with every movement. Let's talk about woodcutting. You didn't store enough firewood. You never did. So you went out into the forest, snow up to your calves, shoulders hunched, fingers stiff, and you chopped. Swing, split, stack. The logs were wet, the ground slippery. You dragged them back over ice-slick paths with rope lashed to your waist. Water was another battle. The stream froze, the well iced over. You broke the crust each morning with a metal rod or the blunt edge of an axe. Then you carried it inside, arms trembling, sloshing it into pots before it turned solid again. Clothing was layers of wool and linen, heavy when dry, heavier when wet. Walking in snow was its own workout, lifting your knees higher, pushing through resistance. Every step burned, every step counted, and food, scarcer than ever. You dug through root cellars, hoping the rats hadn't gotten there first. You rationed salt pork. You peeled mold from cheese and boiled stale grains into soup. Your body ran lean, just like the fire in the hearth. And still, you moved. Children had to be warmed, animals had to be fed, roofs had to be cleared before the thatch collapsed. Everything weighed more. Everything took longer. But you didn't stop, because stopping meant freezing. Stiff limbs, numb fingers, slower breath. The fool once said, "Winter is the time the world checks your pulse." And in the medieval world, you proved you were alive by moving, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt, because cold didn't excuse you. It tested you. Dancing wasn't leisure, it was labor in disguise. We pictured dancing as celebration, joy, rhythm, laughter, and in the Middle Ages it was that. But it was also exercise. Because when the sun set and work paused for a moment, the body didn't always rest. Sometimes it danced, not in polished halls or under chandeliers, but in dirt courtyards, on packed mud floors, in fire-lit taverns where the straw stuck to your boots and the music came from whatever could be struck, strummed or shouted. The dances were lively. Reels, jigs, line dances, circle stomps. You didn't glide, you stomped, you spun. You hopped from foot to foot with the energy of someone who knew this might be the only moment all week their body moved by choice. And it wasn't just young people. Everyone danced. Children, elders, farmers, shepherds, bakers and brewers and midwives. Because dancing wasn't a luxury. It was part of life, part of ritual, part of keeping warm when the fire died too soon and the ale kicked in just right. It built leg strength, cardiovascular endurance, core stability. Try stomping in boots for 20 minutes with a full belly and half a mug of mead. Try swinging someone's hand while laughing and gasping for breath, knowing the stew might be burning but your heart was still beating harder than it had in days. Some communities had traditional dances for feast days, weddings, solstices. They weren't gentle, they weren't slow. They required coordination, timing, and sometimes the balance of a tightrope walker, especially when the floorboards wobbled and the goats hadn't quite left the yard. The fool once said, "If you can dance after a day's work, you didn't work hard enough." But he danced anyway, because the truth was, this was work, just work wrapped in rhythm. Sweat disguised as celebration. Motion passed from body to body like a flame that refused to go out. And when it was over, your limbs were warm, your blood was high, and your feet hurt, but in the best way. Sunday wasn't rest day, it was reset day. You've heard it before, Sunday is the day of rest. But for a medieval peasant, rest didn't mean stillness. It meant a different kind of movement. Because the fields might pause, the tools might be laid aside, but your body, it still worked. You woke just as early. The animals didn't know it was Sunday. They still needed feeding, milking, chasing. The fire still needed kindling. The baby still cried. The wind still blew through the cracks in the thatch, and then church. For most, the walk alone was a journey, 2 miles, sometimes 5. Through mud, through frost, through rain that soaked your only cloak. You didn't ride, you walked with the family, in silence or song, depending on the mood. Uphill, downhill, through forest, past fields. You arrived, muscles already warm, not from rest, but from ritual. Inside the church you stood. Benches were rare. Kneeling was constant, standing again, sitting on your heels, rising, bowing your head, holding posture while the priest recited Latin you didn't fully understand. Then came the way back home. Longer now, hungrier now. But the day wasn't over. Sunday was when you patched clothes, sharpened blades, cleaned tools, sorted grain, mended fences, swept the hearth, prepared for another 6 days of labour. Some cooked, some mended, some repaired roofs, others bathed, lifting buckets, hauling water, scrubbing children who didn't want to be scrubbed. The fool said once, "Sunday is the day your body pretends it's resting, while your hands prove it's lying. And that was the truth. You didn't train, you didn't sweat in a gym, but your body still moved through hundreds of small tasks that made Monday possible. Sunday wasn't a break, it was a reset. The moment you stepped slightly back, before stepping forward again and again into the rhythm of toil. Childcare was a workout with no finish line. In the medieval world, if you were a parent, you didn't just raise children. You carried them, you hauled them, you chased, lifted, rocked and balanced them while doing everything else. Childcare wasn't separate from labour, it was woven into it. Babies didn't sit in cribs. They were tied to hips, strapped to backs, or carried in the crook of your arm while you stirred soup or fed pigs. And toddlers didn't sit still. They ran toward wells, fires, streams, goats and tools they had no business touching. You were in a near-constant state of motion, up and down, side to side, lifting, twisting, catching, bending. There were no strollers, no high chairs, no baby gear. Just your body, adapting to the rhythm of care. And it never ended. A mother might have one infant at her chest and another on her leg, both squirming, both wailing, while she tried to finish sewing a tunic or prepare a bowl of grain before the water boiled away. A father might carry a child while stacking hay, dragging a sled or tending sheep, one hand on the tool, one arm wrapped tight around a squirming body. Older children weren't easier. They needed clothing, chores, correction. They wandered off. They got into trouble. They trailed behind just far enough to be unsafe. Discipline required more than shouting. It took presence. You moved with them. You reached for them. You kept pace. And when they finally slept, you didn't. You still had to cook, clean, plan, work. Your body became part of their safety system. A perch, a protector, a seat, a ride, a living, breathing anchor for someone too small to survive alone. The fool said, if children are the future, then a mother's spine is the road they walk on. He wasn't far off, because in the medieval world, raising a child didn't just test your patience, it trained your entire body. And there were no medals, just small hands that grew a little heavier day by day. Night work, how sleep came after one last task. The sun was down, the fields were quiet, but your body, not finished, because even after the day had drained you, there was always something else. Night in the medieval village wasn't leisure, it was just a different shift. You came inside to dim light, tallow candles if you had them, a smoky hearth if not. Your clothes still damp, your muscles buzzing with exhaustion. And yet, there were tasks waiting for hands, spinning wool, a spindle between thumb and finger, twisting raw fleece into thread. It took focus, precision. You sat cross-legged or hunched forward, body curling around the movement like a question mark, mending garments, the day's tears, holes, broken seams, sewn with a bone needle by flickering firelight, eyes squinting, neck bent. You didn't change clothes often, so what you had had to last. Drying herbs, hanging bunches from rafters, sorting leaves, crushing roots. Your hands smelled of dirt and sage and something bitter you couldn't name. Grinding spices, rare, expensive, rationed, a mortar and pestle pressed rhythmically on a stone slab, slow circles as the last of your strength left your shoulders. And sometimes, storytelling. Not a break, but a rhythm. One person worked while another spoke. Tales of saints, wolves, weather, warnings. You listened with half your brain, the other half stitching, stirring, weaving. Your body kept moving, gently now, deliberately, the way a wheel still spins long after the rider has gone. And when you finally crawled into bed, straw poking through the blanket, the dog curled by your legs, it wasn't about dreams, it was about stopping. The fool once whispered, sleep isn't rest, it's permission. Because in the medieval world, you didn't get to rest. You earned it. One last stitch, one last sweep, one last breath. No sick days, just slower work and more pain. There were no excuses, no doctor's notes, no calling in from a warm bed. If you were sick in the medieval world, you worked anyway. Not out of pride, out of necessity, because the field didn't care if your joints ached. The fire didn't light itself because your fever spiked. Your child still cried, your animal still waited, your body still had to move. You learned to function in discomfort. You got up slower, bent stiffer, paused more often, but still finished the same tasks. You wrapped rags around your head if the cold gnawed at your ears. You stuffed cloth into your boots if the sole was worn and your feet bled. You chewed bitter herbs for pain, for cough, for fatigue, but none of them fixed the root. They just numbed it, enough to keep going. Your body adapted. You leaned on the cart instead of pulling it. You used your left hand when your right wrist failed. You took longer paths to avoid hills, but you walked them anyway. Neighbours helped sometimes, but only if they weren't just as sick, or tired, or overwhelmed. Even childbirth came without pause. A woman could give birth in the morning and be milking goats by sunset. There was no maternity leave. There was only what had to be done. The fool once said, "In this village, if you're breathing, you're working." And even if you weren't, someone was moving your share. There was no concept of wellness, no luxury of recovery. You didn't count your steps or track your heart rate. You dragged your limbs forward until they stopped, and even then, you might still finish that last chore, because pain wasn't permission to rest. It was just a reminder that you were still alive, and still needed. Market day was leg day. With bonus lifting, once a week, maybe twice, your village came alive in a different way. It was market day. But this wasn't a stroll with a basket. This was a full-body event, a marathon masked as routine. First, you packed. If you were selling, you gathered everything. Eggs, onions, wool, pots, woven baskets, smoked meat. You loaded it into sacks, crates, wheelbarrows if you were lucky, but often just your arms, balanced on your back, hung across your shoulders, sometimes strapped to your head or chest with rough-cut rope or fabric. Then, the walk, because the market wasn't next door. It could be miles away. You started at dawn, or earlier, through wet grass, through frost, over rocks, on uneven paths that turned to rivers after rain. Children in tow, chickens in tow, always something slipping. You moved fast, not because the market would vanish, but because good spots filled quickly. Once there, it didn't slow down. You lifted, set up, rearranged, stood for hours, shouted to be heard, haggled, bargained, lifted again. You reached, squatted, waved, counted, hauled, and when it was over, you did it all again, in reverse, carrying the few coins you earned and whatever unsold goods you had left, plus any new supplies. The weight wasn't less on the way back. Sometimes it was more. Ale jugs, cloth scraps, iron tools, salt bricks. You got home at dusk or after. Sore, dusty, blistered. But the work didn't stop. You still had to feed the animals, still had to light the fire, still had to unload it all. The fool once said, "If the market doesn't break your legs, the walk home will." And he had a point, because market day wasn't rest, it was leg day, with a little extra chaos, and no clean socks. Every meal meant a workout, even the small ones. In the medieval village, there was no such thing as grabbing a quick bite. Every meal was the end result of effort, not just one task, but a chain of them. Physical, persistent, and often exhausting. Want a pot of porridge? First, haul water. Cold, heavy. Multiple trips if the pot is big. The well might be down the lane or farther still. Each round trip burning time and strength before a single grain is boiled. Then start the fire. No fire means no food. Flint to steel, coaxing spark to flame. Your body hunched, lungs burning from smoke, hands raw from splintered kindling. The fire doesn't cooperate. You don't argue, you adjust. Next, prep the grain. Grinding barley or oats with a handstone. Slow, steady, shoulder-driven motion that you feel in your wrists and spine. Every bowl begins with 20 minutes of rotation, leaning into the stone like a labourer into his plough. Now the stirring. You hold the wooden spoon in both hands, stir clockwise, then switch. Over an open flame, arms tight from carrying, neck bent forward. Not for a few minutes, for half an hour, maybe more. And once it's cooked, you serve it in heavy clay bowls, not plates. You carry them, not on trays, but in your hands, one after the other. You feed the children first, then yourself, if there's enough. No forks, no napkins, no shortcuts. And if you're baking bread, add in kneading, lifting the flour sack, waiting for the dough to rise in a room too cold to cooperate, adjusting the heat of the oven with live coals, removing the hot loaf without burning your arms. Even the scraps required movement, washing bowls, saving crumbs for chickens, dumping ash, scrubbing the pot with sand, not soap. You didn't clean up. You worked backward through the process, again. The fool said once, to eat in this world, you burn half the calories first. And he wasn't wrong, because a medieval meal wasn't fast, or easy, or passive. It was a ritual of movement, start to finish. The kitchen was your gym, the food was your reward, and hunger was always waiting just around the corner. The body wasn't built, it was shaped by the land. You didn't train, you didn't diet, you didn't count steps, and yet your body changed. Not sculpted in a mirror, but shaped by the land. Years of repetition, of bending, hauling, crouching, lifting, of waking in the dark and walking until your legs forgot what rest felt like. There were no abs to show off, but your core held steady every time you braced against wind while chopping wood, every time you swung a bucket from well to shoulder. There were no biceps to flex, but your arms learned power from pulling ploughs, scrubbing iron pots, carrying children who never stopped squirming. Your back curved, not from bad posture, but from 10,000 hours of digging in the same field season after season. Your feet hardened, your fingers thickened, your skin told your story. Blisters, sun, ash, cold. You didn't worry about fitness, you worried about winter, about spoiled grain, about wolves, about who'd help you mend the roof before the next storm. Your body didn't work for beauty, it worked for bread. The fool said once, peasants are carved from the world the way rivers carve through stone. And it was true. Every movement made you, every motion took something and left something stronger in its place. You didn't count calories because you didn't have enough of them. You didn't track workouts because the world was your workout. And the result? A body built not to impress, but to endure, to hold, to push, to lift the weight of survival and keep walking forward into the wind. So now you know, there was no medieval gym, just the land and everything it demanded. No sets, no reps, just motion. Every day, every season, until your muscles didn't ask questions anymore. You didn't wake up to train, you woke up to live. And living meant lifting, walking, building, stirring, squatting and grinding, sometimes all before noon. There were no cheat meals, no recovery shakes, no treadmills or mirrors or trainers, just the quiet knowledge that if you stopped moving, someone went without. So maybe the real secret isn't a routine. Maybe it's rhythm, a rhythm of work, of breath, of small motions repeated so many times they become something more than survival. They become life. And if you're still listening, still here, winding down as the night wraps around you, thank you. Let me know in the comments, what's the most physical job you've ever had? What's the chore that's left your arms shaking, but your mind strangely calm? And if this slow, quiet walk through the past helped you relax, feel free to like the video and subscribe. We've got more stories waiting, more footsteps to trace, more quiet truths behind the noise of history. Until then, sleep well, move gently, and remember, your body was made for more than you think. Even now, even here, even in the stillness. Good night.